Ravens fans and NFL fans alike learned just how good this team can be in their Week 1 preseason win over the Eagles. But even Ravens fans like myself who tend to sport the purple glasses from time to time, we know that the job is still not finished.
Job's not finished. Job finished? No, I don't think so.
The Ravens had their first of 2 joint practices today with the Minnesota Vikings, and I think we learned 2 very different things. The Ravens defense looks like it can be a real problem for the rest of the league. And while I do feel similarly about the offense, there's still some work to do there. Because for the most part of this joint practice, the Ravens defense was flying around and making Minnesota's life very hard. They were getting pressure. They were competing with Justin Jefferson. But on the other field, Vikings DC Brian Flores was dialing up blitz after blitz and getting after Lamar Jackson in this offense pretty consistently. And the truth is the Ravens offense never fully found their rhythm today in practice. Then right when you thought you understood exactly how today's practice went, the final 2-minute period flipped the entire script. So we've got a lot to get into on this episode of the Reigning Ravens Report right here on the Purple Rain Podcast YouTube channel. If you enjoy daily Ravens content just like this, please be sure to leave a like on this video and sub to the channel if you're new. My name is Sudden Death, and let's get into it. All right, Rain Gang, this is the type of practice I have been waiting for. Training camp is useful, but eventually practicing against your own teammates really just becomes an open book test. You know the tendencies, you know the personnel, and you've seen the same looks. Joint practices takes away that answer key, and the Vikings gave the Ravens a very different look today, especially defensively. Brian Flores came after Lamar Jackson. Different pressure looks, different blitzes, and bodies all around the line of scrimmage. And to be honest, it really hindered the Ravens' offense's ability to push the football down the field today. There were a lot of quick completions, and there were some nice individual plays. But overall, the offense was described as a little bit sloppy and inconsistent. And I'll provide more context on that later in the video. But let's actually start with the defense. For a large portion of practice, the Ravens' defense did seem to be the better unit out of the two. And I think that matters, because this was not the Ravens' defense beating up on their own offense. They were out there seeing different route concepts, different personnel packages, different protections. And one of the biggest tests was obviously Justin Jefferson. Now, I'm not going to lie, Justin Jefferson got his. But of course he did, because it's Justin frickin' Jefferson. But I was actually encouraged by how the Ravens defensive backs performed against him by and large. Marlon Humphrey had 2 pass breakups on Justin Jefferson today. And Nate Wiggins had one of the more interesting sequences of practice. Justin Jefferson caught a deep ball with Nate Wiggins draped all over him. And sometimes you just have to tip your cap. Great coverage does not always equal an incompletion, especially when you're lining up against a Justin Jefferson. Here's what I liked. On the very next play, Nate Wiggins came back and forced a deep incompletion. That's the mentality I want to see. You lose a rep? Fine. But what happens next? Because we don't talk about this enough, but cornerback is one of the most psychologically demanding positions in football outside of quarterback. Because you can play almost perfect football for 50 snaps in a row. Then one bad rep puts 6 points on the board. You have to have short-term memory. And Wiggins immediately responded. And speaking of Justin Jefferson, let me show you guys this rep. This is Bilal Kone trying to deal with one of the best route runners on this earth. And Jefferson gets him. Bad. But we shall not shun Bilal Kone for losing this rep. Because earlier in the one-on-one session of practice, Bilal Kone actually came away with an interception. So again, this is exactly why these practices matter. If you want to find out what your young DBs can handle, put Jettas across from them. You'll find out real quick. That is your closed notes exam. And if you fail that exam, so be it. It's a welcome to the NFL moment. It creates great teach tape for these young guys that they can study and get better from. And especially after the Week 1 preseason game, I have all faith that Jesse Minter can develop these young guys into great players in this league. Or at least some of them. Ravens safety Kyle Hamilton made his presence felt today as well. Vikings wide receiver Trayvon Rudolph tried getting off the line in one-on-ones against Kyle Hamilton. He did not. Kyle got hands on him and basically erased the route before it could even start, eventually putting Trayvon Rudolph on the ground. That's the type of physicality I like to see in these practices. Like the video if you agree. And it's another reason why I'm fascinated by exactly how they're going to use Kyle Hamilton in this defense. Because as we know, he's not just a safety. You can bring him down in the box. You can match him up against tight ends. You can put him over receivers. And you can use him around the line of scrimmage. And when Kyle Hamilton gets a receiver lined up across from him in press coverage, that's not necessarily a mismatch in the receiver's favor. The Ravens pass rush reportedly gave the Vikings some problems today too. You had Tavius Robinson who got home for a sack. You also had Calais Campbell get home for a sack too today. And that type of production is important and exactly what you want to see, because we've been wondering all offseason long, where exactly is this pass rush going to come from outside of a Trey Hendrickson? And when your pass rush and your coverage start working together, that's where this defense gets scary. Because if the quarterback's holding the ball just a split second longer because Marlon Humphrey or Nate Wiggins or Kyle Hamilton is taking away the first or second read, that's going to allow your rush to get home. And you either get a lot of sacks or you get a lot of quarterbacks throwing up prayers that may end up being interceptions. And I'll take either one. And also, to wrap up this defensive talk, enjoy this clip of the Ravens forcing a fumble on one of the Minnesota Vikings running backs. Exhibit A of what happens when you don't give up on the play. Now let's talk about the Ravens offense. The Ravens offense had its moments today, but the Minnesota Vikings did a really good job at making them work for everything. Brian Flores, like he's historically known to do, by the way, was blitzing like crazy. And I personally love that for the Ravens right now. Seriously, give Lamar Jackson as much of this as possible in August, because Brian Flores does a really good job at testing your protection rules. And we've seen that in years past when Brian Flores called defenses against Lamar Jackson. He's going to disguise where pressure is coming from, and he's going to do it well. He's going to put bodies around that line of scrimmage, and he's going to force the quarterback and the offensive line to communicate effectively. And the Ravens' most consistent answer to that today was the quick passing game. Ravens reporters are saying that Rashad Bateman had the best day out of any Ravens wide receiver. And I have a very interesting theory as to why Rashad Bateman has been stepping up so much lately. More on that in today's live stream video. But again, the quick passing game was working. Like I said, Rashad Bateman was involved, Zay Flowers was involved, and Mark Andrews was also involved. But the deeper passing game was much harder to access. And that's where I want to see just how this Ravens team responds offensively to what happened today. Because you don't beat pressure just simply by blocking everybody. Sometimes you can't. You beat pressure by making the defense regret sending it. Find the vacated space and get the ball out. Then create explosives after the catch. And eventually you make Flores think twice about sending that extra defender. Which brings me to one of my favorite offensive clips of the day. Watch Lamar Jackson here. Just look at the timing. He hits his back foot and the ball comes out on time. If you haven't noticed, Lamar Jackson has changed his stance pre-snap. In years past, pre-snap, Lamar Jackson would have his left leg anchored behind his right. But offensive coordinator Declan Doyle and quarterbacks coach Israel Wolfork have changed that technicality in his game. Because like you saw on that completion to Bateman, he starts off with his right foot behind his left, which allows him to be a lot more on time and in rhythm, more importantly, with his wide receivers. And the major point there is that there's less wasted motion in Lamar Jackson's drop back now. And most importantly, the Bateman agenda grows stronger every day. Let's talk about Jacoby Lane, because I found his one-on-ones very interesting. And I actually think today was good for him, even though that everything wasn't pretty. Take a look at this first rep. Lane gets enough separation vertically. The defensive back stays relatively close, but Lane is able to stack this rep pretty well and make the deep catch. And that's another example of everything we've been seeing throughout training camp when it comes to Jacoby Lane. The size, the ball tracking, the catch radius, and the ability to finish downfield. But then there was this completely different story. The DB gets hands on him at the line of scrimmage, jams him up, and Lane cannot escape. The timing of the route is destroyed, and eventually he ends up on the ground. That is the rep that we need Jacoby Lane to be studying. Because to be honest with you, I felt like we learned a lot more on that second rep as opposed to the first one. Because Lane has already showed us that if you let him get into his route, his physical tools can become a real problem. And the reality is NFL corners are not always going to let him do that. They will challenge his release package. They're going to get into his chest. They're going to force him to deploy a plan B when plan A gets erased. That's the next evolution of Jacoby Lane's game, and the Vikings gave him a taste of that today. Despite all of the blitzing from the Vikings defense today, I thought that the Ravens offensive line actually had some really bright spots. And I want you guys to watch the interior of the O-line here. Derrick Henry breaks this thing open, but look at the work happening in front of him. Venga Ioane gets a really nice block, and then watch center Javon Gwynn. My guy throws the defender completely out of the club, and that's what gave Derrick Henry daylight to break off that big run. because Henry does not need much. If you give him a crease and let him get through that first level clean, now somebody in the secondary has to make a business decision. And Javon Gwynn continues to make the center competition more and more intriguing. Unfortunately, center gave us the biggest injury concern in this practice. Ravens center Danny Pinter got rolled up on today and had to be carted off the field. Here's Jesse Minter on that.
Yeah, I was able to go over there and see him. Don't have any updates yet. We'll probably have that, hopefully as he gets some things done, get some tests done, but we'll see how that shakes out.
Danny Pinter was seen visibly frustrated with a brace on his leg. And this is very unfortunate yet significant news because now this center competition has just heated up a lot more. With Javon Gwynn having a good performance against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 1 of preseason, and reports also saying that Ethan Posick should be ramping up and getting some playing time soon, the Ravens are probably going to have to choose between one of those two guys to start week 1 against the Colts. So now we wait on the news with Danny Pinter. Hopefully it's nothing significant, but we'll just have to see. Things also got a little chippy at this practice. Ravens DB Keon Martin and Vikings running back Devon Armstead got into it, where Keon Martin actually threw a punch. But nothing too crazy, luckily, came from that as both teams rushed in and order was restored relatively quickly. Ravens offensive lineman John Simpson also got in a little dust up today too. But if I'm being honest, I love to see these things happen. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Then came the 2-minute drill portion of practice. Now remember everything I just told you. The Ravens defense largely controlled the day. The Ravens offense struggled. Then came the 2-minute situations. And suddenly, Minnesota scored on both of its possessions. Baltimore scored on neither. And that matters. The Ravens defense played extremely well for most of practice, but you have to finish. The Vikings hit on a deep touchdown to Justin Jefferson in that 2-minute period. And like I said, on the other side, the Ravens could not finish either of their 2-minute drives. So if I'm Jesse Minter, that's probably the teach tape. So overall, I'm leaving this practice encouraged by the defense. And also a quick shout out to Keandre Jackson, who was awesome in special teams today. While offensively, there's a lot to work on, but there were some encouraging signs. And you know what? I think that's a good thing. I don't think you want your offense peaking in August. Now's the time to clean up things that might be a little bit rough around the edges. So that way, when the season hits, the offense is flowing. But now I want to hear from you guys. Who impressed you the most from everything we've seen and heard today? And how concerned are you with the Ravens offense struggling against Brian Flores' defense today? Drop it in the comments. But that is going to be it for me. Please be sure to like this video if you enjoyed the content. Subscribe if you are new. This is the Reigning Ravens Report on the Purple Rain Podcast YouTube channel. My name is Sutton Def. We'll catch you guys in the next one. And may purple rain.